Hi, welcome to my channel. This is my third video documenting the composition of my work Symphony for Piano Quintet. In the previous videos I described the work as well as the first movement called Portale. In this video I'll introduce you to the second movement, Reminiscenze. The title means Reminiscences, in other words, memories. Whose memories? Mine, of course. My idea was to write a very active movement with a playful character and, therefore, I decided to write it in the form of a rondo, which has been used for centuries to compose music with that character. In a rondo, a main section alternates with other non-repeating sections called episodes, thus giving rise to the sequence A, B, A, C, A, and so on. In Reminiscenze, I've alternated 4 appearances of the main sections with 3 episodes. It's in the latter that the title of the movement is reflected, since in each of them I've cited a piece that I remember hearing or playing in my childhood. The main section is based on a very simple idea, the constant repetition of a chord. However, as simple as this idea seems, the way I've developed it is anything but simple. There's a short rhythmic motive, which is inspired by a typical motive of the music from northern Italy, which is where my family comes from. Time signatures change randomly, affecting the way the motive feels, as it goes from a simple meter to a compound meter. So there's an overlap of predictability in the repetition of the chord and unpredictability in the rhythm. At the same time, the piano plays an ostinato on 16th notes, sometimes using different time signatures to maintain the beaming of the notes. As a result of this, the ostinato shifts relative to the strings, sometimes starting at F sharp, other times starting at D. Finally, on the harmonic side, there are changes every now and then, but there is no indication as to where those changes may occur, and in the following appearances of the main section, the harmonic changes are different. The set use is mainly 735, although sometimes I change it to 632 and once even to 535, both of them subsets of 735. To be clearer on this, 735 is the diatonic scale. 632 is the d'Arezzo hexachord, the same scale but with the 7th note omitted. And 535 is the pentatonic scale. Listen to a fragment of this section. Here's a table that compares each presentation of the main section. I know it may seem overly calculating, but this is the result of a post-analysis. I wasn't really doing all these calculations while composing the piece. On the other hand, you don't need to know what all these numbers mean. Just look at the changes that, with a few exceptions, occur in each row. That's what's important here, because it means there's variety, which is exactly what I was looking for. Also, the number of phrases in each presentation is different. Once again, variety. There are other changes that take place with each occurrence of the main section. In the second, whose first bars you can see here, the piano has the same time signatures as the strings, so its part is no longer independent of theirs. Let's listen to a few measures. In the third appearance of the main section, the repeated chords are not on the strings, but on the piano, and the strings play arpeggios in 16th notes and 8th note triplets. This is also the shortest appearance of the main section, as it only has 2 phrases. Let me show you how it sounds. Finally, in the last appearance of this section, the strings are divided into two groups that are out of phase by a fourth note. This is something that makes me very happy to have switched to Dorico a few years ago. It can also be done in Lilliput, but Lilliput is much more difficult to use than other notation programs. In Sibelius, it can be faked, although not without much effort on the part of the user. And I suppose that's also the case in MuseScore. I don't know about Finale, but I guess it also has to be faked. The piano in this final section is also out of phase, by an eighth note, but I preferred to align it with the first violin and cello, as the part is easier to play that way than writing it with an eighth note offset, which would be more difficult to sync with the strings. Here, I must say that I'm not satisfied with the playback. I don't know whose fault it is, if it's Dorico or not performer, but the diads on the first violin sound with an accent on the lower note when that shouldn't happen. Both notes should have the same volume, or at least the most accentuated note should be the upper one. I haven't been able to correct this behavior, but it's not important anyway. A cool thing to note here is that the result of having the parts out of phase is a sound that resembles that of a strummed guitar. An interesting coincidence, I must say. Also, this section doesn't have an ending, but leads directly to the next movement, which I'll show you in a future video. Let's listen. Now let's move on to the episodes. As I said before, each of them quotes a piece by other composers that I relate to my childhood. At first, I thought I would end up writing melodies inspired by those pieces, but then I realized that they were all in the public domain, so it occurred to me that maybe I could just quote them note by note and superimpose them on some other element to alter their sound and make them less obvious, which is what I did in the end. The first quote is a piece by an anonymous composer that my mother used to play on the guitar when I was little, a work commonly known as Spanish Romance in E minor. A link to a full performance is in the description. As you can see, the piano continues with the rhythms set in the main section. This is the element the quote overlaps with, so, in a way, the episodes function as a kind of extension of the main section. However, both elements are disjointed, each progressing independently of the other, both rhythmically and harmonically. In this first episode, the quote is played by the first violin and the cello, while the other two strings play sustained chords that, like the piano part, try to twist the harmony of the piece. Let's hear a few measures. The second episode quotes a piece that I remember hearing my father play on the accordion, the very popular Waltz from The Merry Widow by the Austro-Hungarian composer Franz Lehár. There's also a link to a performance in the description. The piano does the same as in the first episode, but the changes in time signatures are not identical and neither are those of the harmony. Here I've only kept the melody of the waltz, which I've given to the viola in canon with the cello. Instead of the usual waltz rhythm, I've written arpeggios on the violins that somehow suggest it. Both the canon and the arpeggios, of course, are related to the first movement. Let's listen to a fragment. Finally, the third episode features a piece that I used to perform when I was little. It was the very first serious piece that I learned, Friedrich Kuhlau's Sonatina Opus 20 No. 1. from which I've quoted the first 16 measures of the first movement. You'll find the link to a full performance in the description. The piece is, of course, on the piano. Where else could it be? And the strings play the rhythms that relate to the main section. I also play around a lot with dynamics, making one element in the foreground when the other is in the background, and then reversing that relationship over and over again. Let me show you. I think that's all I can say about the second movement. I hope you found this video interesting. If you do, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to be notified every time I post a new video. I'll pause for a few weeks in describing this work, and in my next videos, I'll show you the other piece that I'm working on, which is called Hydra. Until then, take care. Ciao.